After the Civil War, something really big changed in America. You know, that trickle of people heading west? It became a flood. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people who weren't just passing through anymore. They were putting down roots and completely transforming the continent. But who were they, and what on earth pulled them away from everything they knew? Well, let's dig in. Go on, take a second. When you think Old West, what pops into your head? Is it a lone cowboy riding across the plains? Maybe a dusty town with a saloon? Yeah, that classic Hollywood image? It's powerful, for sure. But it's just one tiny piece of a much bigger, way more complicated, and honestly, a far more interesting story. See, the truth is, there wasn't just one kind of settler. It was more like waves of different people, and each wave was driven by something totally different. You had folks chasing a fortune in gold, hunters tracking massive herds, religious pioneers searching for a perfect society, and farmers just desperate for a piece of land to call their own. And they were all crashing into each other in this huge, wide-open space. All right, so let's blow past that simple cowboy story. Let's look at the real forces that pulled people across the continent and completely reshaped the nation in just a handful of decades. The first big wave of people, well, they weren't pulled west by the promise of good farmland. Nope, they were pulled by the glint of something much faster, gold. That dream of striking it rich overnight, it sent an absolute flood of people rushing into the mountains. And wow, just look at this timeline. This wasn't a one-and-done deal. It was a total chain reaction. Gold in Colorado, and boom, almost immediately after, silver in Nevada. Then it's on to Idaho, Montana, the Black Hills. Every time a new strike was announced, it set off a whole new frenzy, pulling more and more people deeper into places that were barely on the map. But here's the crazy part. For every one person who actually hit the jackpot, you had thousands who went home with nothing. The real money, a lot of the time, was made by the people who came after the miners. You know, the shopkeepers, the saloon owners, the guys who built the towns that just popped up out of nowhere to serve this massive influx of mostly single men. Okay, check this out. This stat from Colorado, it says it all. In about 7 years, miners pulled out over $25 million worth of gold. That's a lot of money, right? But look at this other number. Outside investors poured in more than double that amount. They weren't just betting on the mines, they were betting on the rush itself. The real economic engine wasn't the gold, it was a gold fever. So when it comes down to it, the most valuable thing these rushes brought to the Rocky Mountains wasn't actually silver or gold. It was the people. Over 100,000 migrants settled the region, and they're the ones who laid the foundation for the cities and states that are still there today, long after most of the mines went bust. Okay, so let's shift gears. We've talked about what was buried under the ground. What about the fortunes that were walking right on top of it? I'm talking about the millions upon millions of bison on the Great Plains, and the hunters who looked at them and didn't see majestic animals. They saw a walking, breathing industry. And you gotta understand, this wasn't about putting food on the table. This was industrial-scale harvesting. Bison hides were used to make this incredibly tough leather for the machine belts that were powering all the new factories back east. It was a key ingredient for America's Industrial Revolution, and the demand was just bottomless. And this chart, wow, it shows you just how devastating this all was. Just think about this. Halfway through the 1800s, there were more than 10 million bison. By the early 1880s, just a few decades later, there were maybe a few hundred left. That's not a decline, that's an annihilation. And it was all fueled by that industrial demand and made brutally efficient by the new railroads stretching across the plains. This famous and pretty grim photograph really shows you how everything became a product. Nothing went to waste. Even the bones were piled up, shipped back east, and ground into fertilizer. It's just a shocking visual of an entire ecosystem being taken apart for profit. All right, now for a total 180, a completely different reason for heading west. While some folks were chasing gold and others were chasing bison, a third major group went west searching for God, and for a place where they could finally practice their faith without being attacked for it. These were the Mormons. Between 1846 and 1868, a staggering 70,000 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints made that incredibly difficult journey. And unlike almost everyone else, they weren't being pulled by the promise of profit. They were being pushed out by really intense religious persecution back east. And this belief, it was everything to them. They truly believed that they had been chosen by God to build a brand new utopia, what they called a New Jerusalem, right there in the American wilderness. This wasn't about getting rich. It was about building a perfect community. And that mission gave them a kind of drive that was totally different from the other settlers. So, under their leader, Brigham Young, they headed west and set up this amazing, highly organized society in the pretty tough landscape of Utah. And because they focused so much on farming and irrigation, their towns actually became these critical supply stops for all the other travelers who were on their way to places like California and Oregon. But for all that, for the gold, the bison, even the search for God, the number one reason people went west, the thing that drew more people than everything else combined, was land. Just the simple, powerful idea of owning your own farm. And this was all kicked into high gear by one of the most game-changing laws in American history, the Homestead Act of 1862. The deal couldn't have been simpler. The U.S. government would literally give you free land as long as you were brave enough to go out west and try to make a life there. And the way it worked was actually pretty straightforward. You'd go out, find your 160-acre plot, and file a claim. Then, for the next 5 years, you just had to improve it, build some kind of house, plow some land, maybe dig a well. If you did that for 5 years, the land was yours, free and clear. I mean, it was the American dream, right there in black and white. So who jumped on this deal? Well, tons of Americans, of course, but also thousands and thousands of immigrants. Just imagine being a second or third son from somewhere like Scandinavia, knowing you'd never inherit the family farm back home. All of a sudden, America offered you a chance to have something that was completely your own. Even some unmarried women were able to claim their own land, which was pretty remarkable for the time. If you want to see just how huge this was, look no further than Kansas. In 1860, the state had around 10,000 farms. Just 20 years later, thanks to the Homestead Act, it had nearly 240,000. That's insane. These massive plains that people used to think were basically a desert were being turned into the nation's breadbasket. And hey, it wasn't just Kansas. Take a look at Texas. The population just exploded, from 200,000 people in 1850 to over 3 million by 1900. In just 50 years, the span of a single lifetime, it went from being a sparsely populated frontier to one of the biggest states in the country. It's just a mind-boggling demographic shift. So really, when you peel back the layers of the Old West, you don't find one single story. You find this incredible, complex history woven from these three powerful threads: that frantic hunt for gold, the deeply faithful search for a religious utopia, and that powerful, grounding desire for a piece of soil to call your own. Together, all these different movements settled the continent and created the American West that we know today. But all of this incredible transformation, it leaves us with a really big question. One that kind of hangs over this whole era. This expansion definitely built a nation, but what was the true cost?